Hi, listeners. We've got two fantastic guests. Frank King, always amazing, the mental health comedian, and he is one of the authors as well as one of the editors and the voice of the audiobooks of the anthology series Guts, Grit, and the Grind, which is all about men and mental health, especially covering the topic of suicide. Our other guest is Peter Dudley. He is a fundraising executive and an author, and he has a wonderful journey that he shares during this show of why he did a chapter in the second book of the anthology. So tune in, and we'll get to know these gentlemen in just a second.
I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years, and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all, we promised we'd be cordial.
Gentlemen, Peter, Frank, thank you so much for coming on Mental Health News Radio.
Delighted.
Happy to be here.
So, this is an anthology series, the book that I just mentioned in our intro. And what number is this in the anthology? What book number?
3, I say. Wait, no, we're still working on 3. I'm guessing number 2. Peter, what do you think?
yeah. Frank is in the middle of making them, so I'll say as I'm an author in book number 2, which just came out. Book 1 was out a few months before that, earlier this year, and 3 is due out later this year, and I think 4 is early 21.
Wow.
I mean, I must be in 3 then, because I'm voicing number 2, and I'm not in there, I don't think.
I know, Frank, you're not in all of them. I'm shocked.
Well, I do have 2 stories, one as myself, one anonymous. Not that I care anybody know the stuff about me in that one, but there are other people in the story, and I don't want them to, the blowback to affect them.
That makes sense. So I want to ask you this, and then I'm going to ask Peter a question. But Frank, what was the impetus for creating this series?
What went into it?
Yeah, well, what was the impetus for it? What happened to make you go, okay, I'm going to get with these people and I'm going to create this anthology?
It was Sarah Gaer, MA, who does suicide prevention for first responders, mostly men. And matter of fact, her tagline is, "Hi, I'm Sarah Gaer. Was it not I love men? I'm Sarah Gaer." Anyway, hopefully I'll think of it before the end of the interview. Anyway, Sarah wanted to give a book on mental health, mental illness for men to, some of the select group of her students. And she went to Barnes & Noble, brick and mortar, couldn't find it. Went to Amazon, online, couldn't find a book specifically on men's mental health. So she thought, you know what, there's a vacuum in the market. I think we should write one. So she contacted Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas. I'd met Sally a decade ago when I was auctioneering. I auctioneered at an event for her foundation, the Carson J. Spencer Foundation, named after her brother who died by suicide. And so Sarah and Sally got together, and they thought, if we could make it funny, then maybe more people would read it. So they called me, and they said, "Frank, listen, we're doing a book on mental health for men. I want to know if you'll add the automobile metaphors because it looks like an automobile owner's manual, and wonder if you'd make it funny. And I said, oh, wait a minute. You two ladies are writing a book on men's mental health? Don't you think you might need, I don't know, a man? And they went, a man. And so that's how I said, here's the deal. I just want to be a co-editor or whatever, and I want to voice the books for Audible. And they said, fine. So that was the genesis of it. And Kristin, you know that 8 out of 10 people roughly in the United States who die by suicide now are men. It's practically an epidemic. And most of them age 45, 54. So that was part of the impetus was to try to stem the tide of male suicides.
Right, exactly. Peter, walk us through how you got involved in becoming an author.
Okay, well, so I knew Sally way back. I think we went to middle school together and a little bit of high school. And then we reconnected through my previous job, which I was in community relations for a Fortune 25 company. And Sally was doing suicide prevention work. And in my employee engagement role, she asked if I would participate in something she was doing out here in San Francisco, a panel discussion and roundtable. And I said, sure. I didn't really know what I was getting into, but Sally's compelling. So I went and I learned a lot about suicide prevention and suicide statistics there. So then Sally and I sort of connected more over time professionally and reconnected because we'd known each other as kids. And then about a year and a half later, my own kid, who was 17 at the time and a senior in high school, was having real depression problems. And my wife and I did not really know what was going on. I turned to Sally for a little bit of help, and she offered some good advice. But then the story that I write in the book is all about my journey and my kids' journey over the next couple of years. And Sally was able to follow that. And when they started to write the book, she turned to me and said, Peter, you've got kind of a different story from a lot of the other stories we have. And all the stories are unique, of course, and they're incredibly written by amazing people. Actually, I like to say they're really regular guys who have amazing stories that tell them in a really personal way. So Sally invited me to write something for the book, and I had already told my story publicly a couple of times. I had written a personal blog post about it and had also been asked to share it a couple of times in professional settings around my job. So it was sort of a natural fit, and me being a writer was another thing.
What was what's been the response from, and how has it changed, if it has changed, from when you first wrote a blog article about your story and then the journey of getting all the way to this book? Now listen, I know the journey is going to be lifelong, so I'm not saying, oh, you're done, but that initial journey of how you felt when you put it out there, and then how that's kind of changed and morphed.
So what was really interesting, so of course, because it was as partly my kid's story and partly my story, I obviously didn't say anything publicly until it was fine with her. And that first blog post, really, I don't have a huge blog following. It's mostly friends and family. And so, maybe 100 people saw it. And the response was incredibly supportive and very warm. It's just an outpouring of love to our family. And it was, very reaffirming to us. As what's been really interesting is, as I've told that story more publicly, I find that by opening up space for people to connect with me in that way and being vulnerable, sort of leading with vulnerability, it allows other people then to turn around and tell me their story right back. And I've been amazed at how many people have a story to tell, have a connection, not necessarily to my particular story, which is I have a transgender child who went through suicidal depression. But the number of people who have some connection point to that, either they have a gender expansive teen or young adult themselves, or they have a niece or nephew, or they have a family member who's struggling with depression or something else. I've become much more eager to share the story and talk about it, specifically because then people that I might have a very shallow relationship with, professional or social, that relationship gets a lot stronger, because then they open up to me and we can talk about some real meaty topics.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I think about, you know, the kinds of issues that you're talking about, which really become issues because of outside reasons, they really aren't an issue in and of themselves. So we're talking about a transgender child that doesn't need to be an issue, but boy, does society tell us that it should be, isn't it?
Well, it's, you know, it actually, it doesn't need to be an issue for parents. I got to admit that when our daughter came out to us, she just turned 18, it was a brain twist, because I had never been faced with it before. And, you know, I'm cisgender. I don't feel any gender dysphoria. It didn't occur to me. There were no signs that we had when she was growing up. It was really a brain twist for us. But of course, we love our kid, and it was, okay, well, help us understand this.
Right.
But on the other side, for her, the depression isn't just situational. It's not just society makes it hard. There's actually
brain
she's
chemistry.
living in her body.
Yeah, and body chemistry, exactly. Yeah, I've just been talking a lot to people about the kind of the constructs that we live within, and what's so great about now, and Frank, I think you and I have talked about this too, is people are starting to throw away these constructs. Oh, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get married. You're supposed to have this job. You're supposed to, you know, you're supposed to be the gender that you came with in terms of your body part, like all this stuff, these constructs that we have, and people are starting to live outside of them. But the journey to get to that place comes with, more often than not, depression, suicidal ideation, you know, that is chemical often, but also brought on by bullying and all kinds of things. So it's kind of what a journey to take on, you know?
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand, and I talk about this in the arena of mental health. It's in my second or third TEDx talk. I say, look, here's the deal. I don't think I'm broken. I believe I was made this way.
Yeah.
And I think for people who are, you know, who find themselves perhaps living in what appears to be the wrong body, you know, or are sexually fluid or whatever, I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's a mistake. I think that's just the way, you know, that's the way they were wired. Came out of the womb that way. Of course, a lot of people disagree, but.
Right.
And by the way, guys, on a comedic note, I finally selected my pronouns.
Okay. Oh God.
You ready?
Let's hear this.
Y'all and all y'all.
There you go. You'd fit right in here in your hometown, Frank.
Oh my God, y'all's a pronoun, and all y'all. Oh man. It's I put it on my LinkedIn profile.
I hear that every day living in the South. I'm in Frank's old stomping grounds. So I keep forgetting to use your name everywhere, Frank, since everybody knows who you are. Well, okay. So I want to ask the two of you a question, and I guess, Frank, you go first and then Peter after. So this journey of becoming a male that speaks about their vulnerabilities and, you know, doing it again and again and again. Do you ever get to a point where you have lost maybe a connection to the vulnerability part because you talk about it so much, or do you not? And does it ever kind of catch you off guard that, oh, I'm just talking about this because I'm doing a talk, and then something comes up out of the blue and you're back to that vulnerability? So Frank, let me start with you there.
Well, I was listening to Brene Brown's book on vulnerability. because everybody said, "Oh, you got to listen to Brene Brown, blah blah. She's so great." And I'm thinking, how good could she be? And I'm listening to the book, and I realized I remember where I was. I was out walking the dogs, and I remember where I was. And when I realized, thanks to Brene, that vulnerability is my superpower. That by coming out and standing in my truth and being vulnerable, especially as a male, that it allows other people to give voice to their feelings and experiences surrounding depression, thoughts of suicide. So without recrimination. So I never tire of, nor does it lose its impact, being vulnerable on stage for the mentally, for the neurotypical in the audience, to help explain what's happening oftentimes with someone who is living with a mental illness, and then for the mentally ill people in the audience,
Right.
so that they know they can relate. They know I hear the same music that they do. Now I've got speaker coaching clients, and they say, I can't tell this story. Some with mental illness, I can't tell this story because I'm going to weep. Well, here's what you do. Because oftentimes when I voice a story out loud to myself that I'm going to use in a keynote, I often weep. So I do it out loud so many times, up to the point where I can get through it with simply maybe a catch in my voice, or
Right.
some indication to the audience that I'm on the verge of tears, and I can hold it right there forever. I mean, I can reach that point every keynote where I get that little catch, or simply by visualizing or taking myself back in time to whatever the situation was. And again, I think that's very powerful. And I tell my coaching students, look, if you're talking about something sensitive like mental health, mental illness, you should do a little Q&A with everybody after you're done as a group, and then offer to hang out a little bit and talk to people individually. Because as Peter said, you discover very quickly when you voice these things, when you say them out loud, pretty much everybody has a story.
Right.
So I allow at least 30 minutes after the general Q&A to do individual Q&A, because when I did my second to last TEDx talk, somebody said, you're in the first flight of speakers. Are you going to leave? I go, I can't leave. Why can't you leave? I go, when we break for cookies and lemonade, just watch. So we break for cookies and lemonade. Sure enough, 8 people lined up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a gift, a blessing. It's my curse and my blessing that I'm able to speak openly about it and allow others to do the same.
Right. It's an interesting thing. I see this more with men, but not all men, that ability to be vulnerable, but then they used to not be that at all. And so real easy to just put that wall back up. So Peter, how about you?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, because I haven't thought of it that way. And as Frank was talking, I was trying to think back to those times and more observe myself through those. I lost connection to the vulnerability. I don't think so, in the sense, I'm taking your question to mean that as I've told the story, has it gotten more practiced to the point where the emotional connection maybe gets dampened and I'm
Right.
more polished in storytelling? I don't think that's the case. What I think has happened for me, though, is my story is more of a caregiver perspective. So, my kid was the one going through suicidal depression. I have never had those thoughts myself. I haven't had gender dysphoria. So there was, for me, the journey was a lot about, well, first of all, learning how to let go of control when I don't have any, but also being that strong caregiver. So as I tell the story, I sometimes forget how difficult it was in the moment and how much I actually went through, because at the time I did a lot of being strong for other people and being available to help other people. And I think that does put somebody in a position, especially I think a man who's grown up with the idea that you have to be strong for other people.
Right.
I think it does have me a little bit wall off my own feelings. So one of the things in the video that Frank recorded for promotion for the book, early on, and I kind of regret I said this, early on I say I'm a little bit different from the other authors in the book, because I come at it from a caregiver. I haven't suffered from suicidal ideation. I haven't, had depression. I haven't had a lot of the things that the other men, but my journey is about my mental health as a man and as a caregiver and as a father. And so to say I haven't experienced that myself is absolutely incorrect. And I kind of regret I said it that way.
But that's part of your journey too, isn't it? To realize this, like you couldn't have gotten to this so important and invaluable realization about the male caregiver without making that statement, without, you know what I mean? Like sometimes we have to see what it is we're saying, hear what it is we're saying, and embody that, and then have this awakening after, and then we go, oh my gosh, that wasn't true. It's not like we were trying to be deceitful. It's just, oh wow, now I really see what that is, that thing that I was doing there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
That's powerful. So how do you take that forward, knowing this about yourself? And I get it. Like I get the caretaker thing, because Frank knows I just do it. And I used to do it for a lot of people that I shouldn't have been doing it for. Frank has ridden the wave of Kristin doing that stuff to the point where you're so drained yourself that you're suicidal almost, or are, because you're just completely drained. But it can become, it's a wonderful thing, first of all, don't get me wrong, but it also can become a thing that keeps you from your, like you said, Peter, your own vulnerability. I found it to be a way to hide what my needs were. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really keen observation. I don't think that I ended up hiding what my own needs were. I think I sort of ended up forgetting how to recognize them. And I tend to be an incredibly balanced person. I work in an organization where we have lots of therapists who help people through cancer. And most of them look at me and say, Peter, how are you such a calm person? and part of what I think what the reason Sally asked me to write a piece for this book is she said, hey, can you end it with 5 tips or 5 observations on how you maintained balance through this whole thing? How did you maintain yourself? And those are things like journaling and finding a confidant to talk to that would listen, leaning into helping people when I felt I needed help, because that would help me recover my own sense of self and ability and agency. So those are the kinds of things that I write about. And I've been working on that ever since writing the piece. I've been working on really learning again how to recognize my own needs.
Yeah, boy, you can just like, I mean, I say this on my show all the time, and listeners, I say this to you, it's so easy to forget your own needs. Like how often, and I say this to listeners, how often have you in your life forgotten those signals from your own body to say, go to the bathroom or get a drink of water? Like even just simple things like that we just teach ourselves to ignore. Well, if we can ignore having to, go to the bathroom, boy, can we ignore a whole lot of more difficult stuff than that, and not even realize. And you have to relearn how to go within and, and luckily we have friends. I mean, I'm very lucky, like Frank, you texted me the other day and said, hey, your texts seem a little terse lately. Are you upset with me? And it's such a gift to have friends and colleagues that know you so well. And thankfully we're in a field where this is the kind of stuff we talk about, but that can do that. And then you can go, like I went and said that to my assistant. Do you think that, oh yeah, you've been real short lately. And I was like, oh shoot. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
But those are those little things that when we get busy in life, we don't realize what's going on. And it takes the loving support, like you said, Peter, the confidants that come and say, well, maybe you need to kind of look at this. And that can be hard, especially when you're dealing with someone who's struggling. Frank, talk a little bit about that, about, you know how vulnerable someone is when they're in that state and they have suicidal ideation, which I did for years too. And one thing said the wrong way can set somebody, off in a direction that you don't want them to go in, and they don't either. So how have you learned to kind of manage that when you have 8 people waiting in line to, come talk to you, and maybe you're the first person they've ever talked to about this?
Yeah, I'm at a comedy gig in San Diego, 10 top, I'm chatting everybody up at dinner before my event. They want to know, comedy, all you do? No, I speak on suicide prevention. And of course the question comes up, hold on, stop right there. Comedian talking about suicide prevention. Then I tell them, I've got major depressive disorder. I describe that. Chronic suicidal ideation. I describe that. And then I go to the bathroom and I realize there's somebody behind me. So I turn and it's one of my table mates. Turns out he's 67. And he says to me, Frank, I've got that. I go, got what? He goes, I've got chronic suicidal ideation. I didn't know it had a name. I thought I was some kind of freak. And then he says, I've never told anybody that, including my therapist.
Oh my gosh.
I said, at 67, you've never revealed that to a therapist? He goes, well, California, if you give voice to that, the clinician could, perhaps by law,
right,
have to pull a 5150, which is take in front of a judge and see if you should be offered a involuntary detention order. And so he never told anybody because he just thought because like I said, he had no idea that other people had this condition. Now, me personally, Kristin, I believe it's the chronic suicidal ideation is one of my superpowers in that it allows me, because I know I'm sitting in the exit row next to the window on an airplane, pull the door open anytime and go. It allows me to, knowing I can end the pain anytime I choose. It allows me to stand a great deal more pain. And yesterday, I don't know if you guys saw my little video about rescuing the 11 cats. We're in an area where they have a level 1, 2, 3 for evacuation. Level 1 means the fire is somewhere nearby, get ready. Level 2 is getting closer, get set. Level 3 is get out now, don't look back, don't take anything. And so I'm in town when we get level 3. I have to drive 25 minutes out back of the house because there's no way I'm leaving 11 cats to die in a house fire. Yeah, so I go in and I have a whole new appreciation for the term herding cats. Yeah, so I get them all in carriers, and then I get a call from somebody, and they go, "Where are you?" "I'm at the house." "You're at the house? You could die in the fire." And I said to him, "No, that's not how it's going down. If it gets close, I'm not dying in the fire. I'm taking another way out. I'm not going to die in the fire." So again, it's like they're like, "What?" I said, "Well, it's my superpower. Listen, I got to run."
And they're like, not in the middle of the field and going, what just happened here?
Yeah. Well, and when the people line up, I try to be very, I let them know I'm not a clinician. I'm just giving my personal opinion.
Right.
My best advice. And sometimes it's from people who are living with a mental illness. Sometimes it's they have a relative. When I did the TEDx in Pensacola, 2 women were there vacationing. And they typed into Google things to do in Pensacola. And up came the TEDx talk. And then there's my name and suicide prevention speaker. So they show up, they paid $95 a piece.
Wow.
And they waited in line. They were the last ones in line. And she had lost her brother to suicide 3 months before. He'd moved in with them. He seemed to be getting better. She comes home and you know the rest of the story. And what they really wanted to know was for me to decode it for them, in that I've stared into the abyss and come back. And their brother did and didn't come back. And what was the difference? I do my best. I said, look, why did he want to kill himself? And my usual answer is, well, there's a really good chance that he did not want to kill himself. Right. That he simply wanted to end the pain. So I try to comfort them as best I can as a non-clinician. And so sometimes it's answering questions for people who do not have mental illness. They just have, they love someone who does or has died by suicide.
So Peter, when you are dealing with, someone being moved by what you're talking about or what you've written about. Obviously, it would be other families too that have a child that is going through what your daughter went through. So there's that piece. But then when someone comes to you and they're really in pain and you having to sort of navigate, how do I talk about this safely for this person?
Yeah, that's I don't think I've ever had any trouble with that. Like Frank said, I'm not a clinician. I have no training in helping people through these. And I don't know most of the vocabulary of the trade. So I have met a number of parents who have gender expansive kids of various ages. Most of the ones that I tend to talk to have teenagers or young adults, and the parents are just trying to figure out how to deal with that. In most cases, the parents are like, I love my kid. I don't know what to do about this. Is this a phase? I help them sort of navigate all of that complexity of feeling, because ultimately what they're really struggling with is their feelings about it and not their kids' reality. And when I can help them understand that this is really about their kids' reality, then they remember, oh, I'm a parent. I love my kid. It's not my job to raise a me that I wish I was. It's my job to raise an adult who's going to be independent and become what they will become.
That should be in every parenting book. What you just said should be in every parenting book out there.
Well, that's sort of at the core of what I wrote. If I can digress into something that I think has helped me throughout my entire parenting career. When our first child, our trans daughter, was born, we thought we were having a boy. And 12 hours after the birth, I'm standing in the hospital room. My wife's half asleep in bed. The one set of the grandparents come in and they start doting on the baby. And it's my mother-in-law says, "This is wonderful. My coworker just had a baby daughter. Maybe they'll grow up and get married." And we all laugh. And my friend who's standing next to me by the doorway leans in and says, "Well, we don't even know if he's straight yet." Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, that's a hell of a thing to say to a new dad 12 hours after, the 30-hour ordeal that that participated in. I won't say that I went through, because really I didn't give birth. But, that was my first thought was, that's a hell of a thing to say to me. And my second thought almost immediately after was, oh, wow, you're right. Mm-hmm. We don't. There's so much about this person that I don't know, and I can't know until they get there. And I focus on helping parents get to that point, because they then can manage everything a lot more clearly, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. So where can people get the book, and give the full title of the book again? Frank, where can everybody get the book?
Well, if you are broke and you want a free copy of the audiobook, if you go to my website, thementalhealthcomedian.com, you can download the MP3 of the entire first book and enjoy it on audio. The second book, both first and second book are available on Amazon. Both are available printed and ebook. The first book is available on Audible, and I'm working on voicing the second book right now.
Fantastic. And it is Guts, Grit, and the Grind, a mental mechanics manual, advanced mechanics in preventative maintenance. And the men and the man are capitalized in the title.
And again, you get a free copy on and I'll have the second one up there on my website as well. Just a free download if you're a little short of cash because of the pandemic.
Nice.
I was delighted to be involved in the project. As I read the first book, as I voiced the first book, the stories, there's a lot of emotion in the stories. I've heard from several authors that when they were doing, writing their story, contribute their contribution, they go back in time to some of those events and they get extremely emotional, have to put it down for a little while and then come back to it. And when I was voicing the stories, you'll notice in some points you can hear me get choked up. And I left that in on purpose so that the listening audience knows I was moved as they were by the story.
Love that. And Peter, for you, Frank, we can go to the mental health comedian. My listeners know Frank very, very well. They don't know the amazing things that you do, Peter, other than what I just described. But when I was looking over your website, you are really speaking to that younger audience, that YA audience with your books. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, thank you. Before I answer that, can I just say that I want to make sure everybody that's listening knows that just my story is about a transgender kid. The stories in these books range across an incredible spectrum of personal stories, and the men that I've met, because Sally and Frank have done a great job, and Sarah have done a great job of bringing many of us together virtually to talk about storytelling and talk about our stories. They're regular guys. They're great people who have gone through amazing things, and they want to share it and hope that it helps people. So if somebody's listening to this and say, yeah, trans kid really isn't, I don't have a kid, it's not really my thing. These books have an amazing array of stories. There's so much to learn from it. So my personal thing is, I write novels and I write poetry, and my novels are in young adult space, tend to be science fiction, fantasy, post-apocalyptic, and the reason I write young adult, and I think this is also one of the things that maybe helps me understand teens a lot, is they're really a lot about finding one's personal place in society. And I think that's incredibly relevant now. If I might digress a little bit, I think we as a generation of parents have raised an entire generation of 18-year-olds with a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And
So true. So true.
You can use that, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's so much, there's such a lack of sort of direction on how to proceed into adulthood now. And there's so many confusing messages. And so, obviously I don't deal with that entire range of things in my novels, but I really like that moment of a person's development when they're coming out of the family structure and going into the societal structure. And what does that mean? And how do they interact with the powers that be for good and bad and all that? And that's where I tend to write and think a lot.
Well, I love it. And you can get to Peter's work by going to peterdudley.com. So it's Peter, PETERDUDLEY.com. And just reading some of the descriptions, like the book Lifelike, I was like, oh man, I want to read that as an adult. Now, if I had read it as a teenager, I would have been lost forever, scooping up every you've ever written. So
Thank you.
Well, and Peter, I've got sort of a reverse family situation to yours. I found out after the fact that both my mother and father were gay.
Oh, wow.
They were in high school together in the 40s in North Carolina. They both desperately wanted children, a family. They were crazy about one another, both smart and funny. And so they decided to do what people did back then, to get married and to attempt to conceive a child. And my mother carried 2 to term that didn't make it.
mm.
Yeah. And where she found the strength and courage to try a 3rd time and then a 4th with my sister, I have no idea.
Wow. Amazing.
So I, in retrospect, a rather sexually fluid family.
Yeah, me too.
I asked a friend of my mom who's 84. I said, "Was my mom gay?" And she goes, "Duh." At 84. So I think I'm going to do a TED Talk one day called "Gay in My DNA," because
I love that.
if I had two parents who were both gay, there's got to be a reason that I like tasteful decorations, Judy Garland, and I have an amazing ability to accessorize. So I think I'm like 1% gay. So the trick for me is never get 99% drunk. That's what I'm thinking. So yeah, so from an early age, my dad died very young. My mom never remarried, and all her friends, turns out, as my wife pointed out, were lesbians. And I realized in retrospect, I've got another keynote called "Everything I Need to Know I Learned from a Lesbian," because they all, rallied around and took care of my sister and me. So yeah, it's so I didn't learn in fact early on, but if just being in an environment like that, you can absorb, what's going on, even if you don't know at a conscious level. It gave me a whole different perspective on, like I said, the binary gender,
fluidity.
Yeah, exactly. It's and after carrying to the term and not making it, somebody said to me one day, "Yeah, lesbians aren't qualified to get pregnant, raise children." And I said, "You better back up a step." Yeah, because I mean, can you imagine the pain of carrying to the term and losing them and then trying? Oh man. Yeah, my mom says that in the hospital when the doctor slapped my behind, because they'd all been with her twice before, all the staff. I cried, doctor cried, my mom cried, the nurses cried, everybody's crying.
Wow.
So yeah, it's I'm with Kristin. I think the whole binary, it's a false construct.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, I'm all for it. It's a whole other show, but I grew up, the same way that and having to hide things because it just wasn't acceptable, and all the junk that does to your mental health. But we'll do another show on that one. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on my show. I'm excited about the book, and I know you guys are too, but thanks for coming and sharing it with our listeners.
By the way, Sarah Gaer, her tagline is, "I specialize in men."
Oh, there you go. Yay, it came out finally.
Got it.
Listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio. Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to proze.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY, candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondermentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it.
Good boy.